Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now let us begin the roundtable session of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. And this roundtable session will be held under the theme of incorporating diversity and broadening partnerships. And this will be preceded by Dr. Rachel Gallela, Senior Research Associate at the Center for Global Development. So now let me hand over the microphone to our distinguished moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome all of them with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, perfect. Let me start by saying it is an absolute pleasure to be back at the Seoul ODA conference. And a very special thank you to Dr. Son, Mr. DeHoon, and the teams at KOICA and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for inviting me to present and moderate this session today. And thank you to everybody who's joining us, both in person and online, for the fourth session of the Seoul ODA conference on the theme of incorporating diversity and broadening partnerships. This session aims to build on the conversations that we've had throughout the day and to hear more from our panelists about the challenges and opportunities for deepening inclusive partnerships for development and delivering on the SDG agenda. We will hear from our panelists about how current partnerships can be expanded, new ones developed, to get back on track for the SDGs. So without further ado, let me just start by briefly reintroducing our esteemed panelists for today's session. Okay, so I'm joined on the stage by Professor Kwak Jae-sung from Kyunghee University, Mr. Heath Cosgrove from USAID, Dr. Stefan Klingebiel from the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, Raga Arnadottir from the OECD, Mr. Ganbold Basanajav from the UNESCAP, Watanawit Jaseni from the Thai International Cooperation Agency, Tormarbulang Lumbantobing from the Indonesian Aid, and Dastan Ilukanov from Kazakh Aid. Thank you all for joining the session today, and we really look forward to hearing your insights and learning from your experiences. So to kick us off, I'm going to take my prerogative as moderator to start with a very brief presentation that I hope will set the scene for our discussion. Okay. So we at the Center for Global Development, in collaboration with colleagues at KOICA, are currently working on an initiative that aims to explore the potential for deepening cooperation for development. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to present some of the questions we've been grappling with as part of this project, as well as some of our early findings, which I hope will provide at least a starting place for our panel discussion. Okay. Yes. So, why do we need cooperation for sustainable development? We've obviously talked about this quite a lot today, so I won't spend too much time reiterating here. But I do think it's worth highlighting that at the midway point for achieving the SDGs, we are currently off track to reach our shared development agenda. The main message coming from this year's Sustainable Development Report, produced by the United Nations, is that the SDGs are at risk. We currently face multiple intersecting crises. We know, for instance, that COVID-19 has increased extreme poverty, as seen on the graph screen, wiping out years of progress towards poverty eradication. The pandemic has caused severe disruptions to health and education, with the UN noting that COVID resulted in a drop in immunization coverage for the first time in a decade and putting millions of students at risk of not returning to school. The war in Ukraine has created a refugee crisis and is threatening a global food crisis as a result of rising costs of food and fuel. At the same time, the ongoing climate crisis is increasing the frequency and severity of climate-related events, which are affecting billions of people worldwide and are expected to have a disproportionate impact on poor and vulnerable communities. And if this wasn't enough, many countries are battling growing inflation and an increasing burden from debt. In this complex development landscape, Now more than ever, there is an imperative to cooperate in response to our shared challenges and to ensure a sustainable future for all. The SDGs themselves frame cooperation and partnership as critical to addressing these challenges. By now, we know the challenges we face cannot be addressed by any actor working alone and will require concerted and shared efforts to make meaningful progress. Yet an important question that remains is whether and to what degree such cooperation is materializing. As part of a new paper, we've been mapping and exploring a range of international cooperation responses to COVID-19 from DAC and non-DAC actors. For us, a key question we wanted to answer was whether responses to COVID-19 moved us closer to a more global model of cooperation for development. As an acute and global crisis, we thought that COVID presented an important test for this cooperation imperative. To do so, we reviewed a range of cooperation modalities, focusing on financial resources, technical and scientific transfers, and broader policy responses to COVID-19 to identify whether such cooperation had materialized. What we found was a somewhat mixed picture. On one hand, it was clear from our analysis that international responses to COVID-19 were global in nature, with a range of countries contributing financial and knowledge-based resources in response to the pandemic. The graph on screen shows a simple count of non-DAC countries that contributed to 4 interagency UN appeals covering health, humanitarian, and socioeconomic responses to COVID. What we see is that a range of countries across income groups participated in these large multilateral and development-focused responses. At the same time, there were important examples of multi-directional transfers and responses that occurred during COVID-19. For instance, we've heard already today about support sent to Italy, perhaps by countries like China and Cuba during the first COVID wave, which shows the reality that knowledge and resources can flow in many directions and highlights the inadequacy of the traditional North-South development model. We also see many examples of non-DAC countries spearheading initiatives in international spaces, such as India and South Africa's proposal of an intellectual property rights waiver on COVID-19 technologies designed to overcome systematic inequalities and allow countries to manufacture their own COVID-related solutions, including vaccines. Yet, while it's clear that a range of countries participated in development-related responses to COVID-19, what we didn't see was the type of global cooperation where actors from North and South worked together for the global good. Instead, many of the development-related engagements we reviewed were bilateral transfers, including in terms of South-South cooperation. And while on the previous slide I showed that a number of non-DAC countries participated in multilateral funds, the scale of this participation was actually quite small. At the same time, we saw examples of DAC countries failing to participate in key non-DAC-led initiatives, such as the CTAP Technology Access Initiative launched by Costa Rica, or actively blocking the TRIPS waiver in its early phases. Indeed, many of the responses we reviewed showed that instead of acting cooperatively, there are lots of examples of self-interest dominating international responses to COVID-19. There are examples, for instance, of restrictions to trade in medical goods throughout the pandemic. And by now, I'm sure we've all heard about the vaccine hoarding that took place, despite calls and pledges to vaccinate the world. The prioritization of the national interest in COVID-19 responses highlights what my colleague on the panel, Stefan, has described as a paradox between the need for global cooperation for development and the low willingness and capacity to cooperate. But perhaps the question emerging from the mixed picture of collaboration in response to COVID-19 and limited engagement between DAC and non-DAC actors is, what are the barriers to deeper cooperation? So we hope to explore this question much more deeply in a forthcoming paper. But for now, I want to share some of the responses we heard when we put this question to a small sample of leaders of development agencies in a recent survey. Our respondents, which were primarily DAC members, but also included one non-DAC country and several multilaterals and development finance institutes, broadly spoke to four main barriers to cooperation. So first, respondents highlighted the challenges of aligning the visions, principles, and modalities of cooperation across DAC and non-DAC actors. In particular, several respondents noted that the prioritization of commercial instruments by non-DAC actors and the sectors they prioritize often stand in contrast to DAC members and limits the scope for cooperation. Others pointed to differences in the uptake of cooperation norms and principles, including around development effectiveness. Second, respondents argued that the political appetite for cooperation across actors is often low. There's some evidence in the literature that this is a challenge for cooperation more broadly, and raises important questions about the likelihood for deeper collaboration for shared challenges if cooperation remains politically difficult. Third, several agencies noted a lack of capacity, mostly time, budget, and staff, to seek, plan, and engage in concerted cooperation. And fourth, some pointed to procedural and legal barriers to cooperation, including the lack of representation from non-DACs in country or in international fora for development cooperation, challenges integrating cooperation into planning cycles, and difficulties aligning different rules of interventions. While the next phase of our research will seek to engage with a broader sample of non-DAC actors to see whether these barriers match their experiences or if there are other barriers to overcome, the question emerging from some of these early responses is, in light of the need for deeper cooperation to advance our vision for sustainable development, how can these barriers be overcome? So on this question, we don't have an answer, but we do think the reality emerging shows that cooperation cannot be taken for granted, even in response to global crises where all countries stand to benefit from collective action. Instead, what we see are three possible paths forward and an uncertain future as to which will materialize. So the first path is a continuation of the current trajectory, where countries prioritize short-term national interests and bilateral action, including when faced with global crisis. Under this model, development cooperation remains driven by competition between countries and underinvestment in the multilateral system to the detriment of global public goods. The second path involves the emergence of a stronger Southern cooperation platform as a challenge to the failure of richer countries to do more to overcome inequalities and support global development outcomes. Perhaps the risk of this scenario is the potential to deepen divisions between North and South through cooperation initiatives that fail to bridge the divide. The third path involves a rethinking and internalization of the narratives of self-interest from the perspective of a global development paradigm, which understands that cooperation on global development challenges is in the interests of all countries. Under this path, the imperative for cooperation would require the creation of new spaces for collaboration and ways to pool and allocate resources in response to future crises. In this scenario, spaces for conversation across actors, like today's conference, provide important opportunities to learn from each other and discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead. This pathway is obviously the most ambitious, yet is the standard that must be met for the global development paradigm to materialize in practice. And I guess as we look to the future, and also the conversation with our panel, the question remaining is how we can ensure that the path forward that materializes is that third option. Okay, So with that, thank you. I'm going to stop there and instead turn to our panelists to answer some of the really tough questions about deepening collaboration for development. So to start, I wanted to ask each of our panelists to share their thoughts, ideally in less than 5 minutes or less, guys, on how partnerships can help put the SDGs back on track. So perhaps I could start with Professor Kwok at the end, and we'll work our way around.
When I was asked to sit here, I was very curious whether I was the first or I was the last. So better to beat them first. That's a Korean proverb. Right, thank you very much indeed, Rachel. As you may have guessed that I'm a professor, a researcher, educator, teacher, advisor, with a specialization in the international development policies. Up in the air, but down to the ground, I'm a field agent, consultant, and implementer of many projects all around the world, actually. I brought one example of my project to show a case, ongoing case of natural partnership and collaboration among many donors engineered by a implementer. Because we've been talking a lot in the policy level, 8 agents level of the collaboration and bilateral and multilateral integration and the partnership. But so far, no one seemed to mention about the importance of the implementer's role in mapping all those funders, donors, and players to make things happen, which is a partnership and integration. I am an implementing consultant of a KOICAS project in Ethiopia on the strengthening startup ecosystem and small and medium-sized firms improvement. We are asked to do some interior of the space and stuffing with fancy equipment to open a state-of-art incubator. Probably the early stages of accelerating functions by providing a proper consultations to the startups and to facilitate them to finance themselves, to attract the proper investment. We educate them, we properly package them so that they can grow further. So we identify many new startups and then we train them, and then probably we hope they are in the takeoff stages as well. At the same time, KOICA already partnered with the UNDP by providing $1 million funding to begin a credit risk guarantee fund for the startups. And then that UNDP also partnered with the local banking institutions because this funding will be a risk guarantee and actual loan will be executed by the local banks. We already started with this partnership alliance model. But when we started the operation, our field agent was contacted by International Finance Corporation, IFC of World Bank. They're also running the similar program of startups. And they want to send some of those very promising startups from Ethiopia to South Korea for about 2 months training and showing for the many incubating also startup environment, especially in Pangyo area. Okay, we said yes, we can facilitate them. And then this program can be partnered with also our program. However, this never has been realized due to the COVID-19 situation, but we are trying to regain the partnership again. In my previous mission, I was contacted by JICA because they are doing the similar thing, the startup business as well, but they don't have any space. But they have programs. They have many pitchings, competitions, and they can finance the promising startups to go abroad and learn something for a short period of time. However, we didn't have that program. Okay, we clicked each other. Why don't Japanese startups, Japanese-sponsored startups come to our incubator and use the space? And why don't Japanese funding sponsor our trained startups to have an opportunity to go Dubai or Silicon Valley, wherever. So we are deeply discussing, KOICA and JICA is deeply discussing about that. And then later, there are more and more stories about that. And then we are discussing with another IFC room about the possibility of direct financing to those incubators. Because in Ethiopia, the venture capital doesn't really work. So we need a public sector financing to make things happen, to germinate these startups. This is a simple example, has, I think, a great deal of implication that how a project at local level implementing institutions can map all those like-minded stakeholders and start a launch a newly integrated fashion for more efficient and effectiveness. If this is happening, maybe 3 or 4 years later, we can replicate the similar model, some other parts of the world as well. Because KOICA and JICA already collaborate with each other. We have a program, so we have a practice. It will be much easier to replicate this model in some other parts as well. So, case-oriented presentation, 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your interventions and for bringing the implementer's perspective to the discussion we're having today. Mr. Cosgrove, may I turn to you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So there are many different models that I've experienced of donor coordination in the field. A lot of it, in my opinion, still revolves around rhetoric. We sit in our capitals and we talk, we sign agreements, we make lofty promises of how we're going to work together. But at the end of the day, we do find that it's quite challenging. There are the issues that you mentioned at the start, such as different modalities and legal matters. Sometimes it's just a matter of bandwidth, the workload that we face day in, day out. But I do believe that it takes, there's 2 models that I've seen that have worked. One is within an international forum, and the other one, and I think this is the most critical and most important, is where the action takes place on the ground, and that's working at the country level together. So on the first one, for an example, a couple of years ago, I was the director of the Global Donor Working Group on Land. And twice a year, we had representatives from all the major international organizations and donors. We met at the World Bank Conference on Land, and then we met at the FAO in Rome. And in each time, we sat and shared the policy topics. We shared the latest research. We shared the latest technical positions on land tenure and property rights. And it allowed all the donors and international organizations to align their approaches. And that went down to the field level. And so we could see that impact of coordination and working together. Other ways that, we hear about people signing joint statements or MOUs. These things are great for public relations, but really, where do we get down to the meat of the subject? Where do we get down to truly helping people and working together? One example, good example I've got is, I mentioned earlier this morning, our MOU with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. We are updating it and expanding our scope, and we are going to re-sign that in 2 weeks. But to complement that, we are setting up a work plan with KOICA to where we have specific, measurable, actionable activities to where we know that we can do them, and we're going to list them, and we're going to track them, we're going to report on those. I think that's a good model. One model that hasn't worked at the field, and I'm not going to name any names, but in a country in this region, we work with 2 other donors, and for political reasons, one of the donors was insistent on going their own way with the procurement of technology. At the end of the day, it was not interoperable with what the other 2 donors were doing. And that was, I think, a huge mistake. It's just an example of how politics can sometimes get in the way, even when you have the best intentions. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that, and for bringing some of the reality of working together in the field and the challenges that happen in practice. Stefan, perhaps I can turn to you. So you spoke earlier about, again, this paradox between kind of the need for cooperation and the willingness and capacity to cooperate. I wonder, I mean, realistically, what is the scope for partnerships to put the SDP back on track within this paradox?
Thank you, Rachel, and congratulations, not just to the presentation, but I think we should expect a quite inspiring paper. Hopefully it will come out very soon. Yeah, just some general remarks on this topic. First of all, let me introduce one more term, and I think this is very much also influenced by what you are saying. I think cooperation, global cooperation is very much needed, but I was also co-editor of a handbook, and in this nice handbook, we are saying cooperation in times of these multiple crisis situations is not enough. We need collaboration. Mm-hmm. So it's not just upscaling the quantity, but also upscaling the quality. So that would, let's say, paradise to get there. What we have at the moment is SDG 17. This is our Sustainable Development Goal related to global partnerships. I think it's not bad. That was what we were able to agree upon in 2015. Just looking at what can we do in our spheres in this regard to make it even, to give it more momentum, maybe 2 or 3 aspects in this regard. First of all, I think for OECD DAC countries, it's important to keep up a credible and transparent ODA system. I think this is always that everybody is trying to do it, but we also know that when governments get under pressure and budget might be a bit more in a constrained situation, there might be also thinking about let's be more flexible. And I think we need to keep up this kind of credible system. My more important point, next point, is about South-South cooperation and South-South cooperation providers. I think at the moment to bring together DAC donors, South-South cooperation providers, and to agree on a set of principles, criteria, seems to be not likely, not to be feasible. Yeah? And maybe we should just accept it, and Korea did a great job with Busan 2011. Since then, we didn't make any progress, rather the other way. But it would be already helpful, I think, for everybody, including recipient countries, if you would have a better understanding about a set of South-South cooperation criteria. And we discussed it already. Some of us were hoping that BAPA plus 40 would bring this kind of clarification. That was not the case. BRICS group, they do not have a common understanding. IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa, they came up with something like a definition, but and from non-BRICS countries, and that's also, let's say, why not to bring together those non-BRICS providers as well. I'm not aware about any joint effort. So what I want to say here is maybe not to make it a strict approach, but to have a better understanding what are criteria. And this is not dominated by OECD or somebody else, but just to agree on some basic facts. I think this would be good, especially for those countries still very much in need of different forms of development cooperation, ODA or South-South cooperation. So to come up with something like this would be great, and to see the group of non-BRICS South-South cooperation providers playing a bit a more prominent role would be great. My last remark in this regard, really very briefly, why not to test a bit the water of mixed formats? We mentioned already G20. G20 consists, in my eyes, mainly of BRICS countries, G7, and the third group is MICTA. One country is missing, but MICTA is the third group. And what is interesting about MICTA, this is Northern or Southern, this is a mixed group. Australia, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey. And when Korea was heading MICTA in 2020, that was the first time that MICTA established a development cooperation work stream. And why not to pick up this and to say, okay, MICTA is not representing the world, it's not representing 100 countries, but it's representing this group, and it's a mixed group. And why not to have a discussion about this within this mixed group? It could be really a role model for many other discussions. So maybe this could be really just to test the water and to try out in how far you can achieve something together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Lots in there. I completely agree on the need to explore, I guess, mixed formats more, the need for criteria for South-South cooperation, and I hope you don't mind if we steal your terminology in pushing for collaboration in this paper more than cooperation. Thank you so much. Braga, over to you.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm so thrilled to be in this company. Just before answering the question about how can partnership put the SDGs back on track, I would like to sort of just outline what does it mean? What does it mean to put the SDGs back on track? And then I think we see why it is so important. Rachel, in your introduction, you talked about poverty. There's an estimate that 260 million people have been pushed back into poverty. Those are just the statistics. Of these, 120 million into extreme poverty. And this has put poverty back, the progress on poverty back to 3 to 4 years globally. So before in 2015, we are further back than that. And this means 5 to 6 years in Latin America, and it means 6 to 7 years in Africa, because that was the average. Education and jobs, you mentioned education. And the pandemic's impact on key ingredients to development. We know the importance of education and human capital. This is even more scaring than the poverty figures. Schools have remained closed in some countries for almost 2 years. And the fact that many firms that shut down during COVID have never reopened has, of course, dramatic economic ramifications. And loss of economic capacity and means to develop. Funding needs, the latest UN estimates put necessary investment to reach the SDG at US dollars 4.3 trillion annually. So this is the environment. How do we do it? And as Stefan said this morning, it's not very likely that if the leaders of the world came together today that they would say, oh, the SDGs, that's the way forward, because it sounds so unimaginably difficult. But we have to face, it's the reality. It's the reality now, and based on the facts that I was putting forth, and there are more, we just need to put the process back on track. And why? Because we have to. And how? Again, like we've been talking about all morning, by cooperating. That's the only way. And how do we get everyone to the table? We need a sense of urgency, and we have the facts that tell us that how urgent this is. And these, like I said, and I repeat, these are just a few of them. And urgency unifies people and motivates people. And it's sort of the sense of the common enemy. COVID was a common enemy. We united in the fight against COVID. We have another situation with the aggression of Russia and the war in Ukraine. There we cannot unify behind a common enemy because that's a political situation. But the SDGs, it's about everyone's livelihood, and that's why the urgency has to be there. And following up on what Stefan said also, it's not enough to forge partnerships only between like-minded countries. We need to have a dialogue across the board without the political classifications. And of course, the Development Center is a safe space for dialogue. Just a commercial break there. But the point is that the SDG challenges, they cut across borders. They cut across the beyond and through like-mindedness. So it is, we just have to face it, that this is the case and we have to deal with it, otherwise things will not work out. And then there's the question of peer pressure. And that is maybe the sort of maybe not the outspoken ideology of the OECD, but that's the sort of the common drive of progress, is to have peer dialogue, peer encounters, and by that putting pressure on countries to be it's like a competition, and we all want to be in the winning team. So if we all agree on the SDGs, can we mobilize the peer pressure to generate what is most important? Innovation and funding. That's what we need to mobilize ourselves, because we're all in agreement. The SDGs are the goals, are the issues, and we just have to find a motivating way of rallying us all together.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Raga, and thank you so much for your interventions. I completely, the need for urgency really resonates with me, especially, in response to COVID-19 and the challenges ahead, which we know are probably, they're severe. Mr. Wasanajav, I turn it to you.
Okay, thank you. Just a few observations from the discussions we just had over the course of today's sessions. Certainly there is a desire across the whole spectrum to move forward on our global agenda through this development cooperation programs. But as you, Rachel, you rightly described, there are barriers, different barriers underlying, you mentioned underlying visions, modalities, principles for cooperation. So we now need to work on the key enablers for the effective development cooperation. So I just want to highlight 2 or 3 key enablers from my perspective. First is we need to work on the national development cooperation policies and anchor these policies with global development agenda. This will facilitate the convergence of principles and visions, since these global development agendas are universal. One example is the Bangkok Declaration, as mentioned this morning by our Executive Secretary of UNESCO, which outlines the region's common agenda. The second enabler, as many speakers also commented, the role of the middle power countries, such as Korea, Turkey, and Thailand. So they are the ones who accumulated both the experiences and technologies and capitals. It could be a good arena of the forum of engagement, sharing their experiences, best practices, and knowledge with the developing and recipient world. So on this note, so today's conference, as well as the upcoming Global South-South Expo taking place in Bangkok in 2 weeks' time, so are the major platforms of engagement, which could, in their turn, to help us to hasten this transformation on this global shift on development cooperation, the very much needed shift that we can achieve. And from our end, UNESCO and East and Northeast Asia office in Korea, so we've been organizing jointly with a number of our development partners in Northeast Asia. Our flagship major forum on development cooperation, which is Northeast Asia Development Cooperation. So we've been organizing with Chinese, China, International Development Research Network, Japan Society for International Development, Korea Association of International Development Cooperation, and Russian Association of International Development Assistance experts. So these are the forums, forums of engagement. They would help also, on the other hand, to rebuild the much eroded the trust and confidence, which was even more true during these conflicts, now ongoing conflicts, already eroded considerably because of the COVID. So here, so this is these are forums, for example, so also could be complemented by the perspectives from the civil society organizations and the youth. So this would be would help both the traditional donors and emerging donors to match the ODA program with the potential, the prospective recipient countries. So this would be a good note replicating our UNSG's call on networked and inclusive and effective multilateralism, also was referred by this afternoon by Grace from UN Office of South-South Cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm so glad somebody mentioned the word trust. I think that's just so important when we're talking about cooperation. May I turn to our colleague from the Thai International Cooperation Agency?
Thank you so much. I have to say that the Thailand, as I mentioned before, we are the recipient countries in the past for many donors, and I'm convinced and trust the partnership cooperation because when we were the recipient, we also provide the counterpart contribution because Thailand in the past, we are the focal point on technical assistance to Thailand. We are not going to implement any project, but what we support is that we provide some contribution for the cooperation that our donor countries provide to the implementing agency of Thailand based on the request. And so in that sense that we think that whenever we support our contribution to the partnership sense that it will make the cooperation program more effectively and smoothly. And when we transition to the emerging donor that we are now, we also thinking about this sense of partnership because we signed many MOU together with our traditional donor countries like Japan, Korea, Germany, France, and many other countries, because we think that we should keep this momentum and relation with our partner countries to make sure that we can create some value, create the sense more impact on our program, not just only with Thailand, but also for other countries as well. I think this is the partnership is already mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals 17, because this 17th goal is mentioned that the goal, partnership for the goals, that I think it's very clear that all partner countries can helping each other to this partnership cooperation. And for TICA, we open for our cooperation with many partner countries. As I said before, we have the cooperation program with JICA for maybe for Senegal. We have with the JICA for the Palestine. This is the model case that we try to build up our partnership with traditional donor countries, and I think it will be complement our South-South cooperation and also with the Triangular cooperation. So this is a very good case that Thailand work together with partner country, and I think that we can explore more and more to work together with partner countries. And one simple case that I think Thailand, as the small provider countries, we don't have our office overseas like JICA, KOICA open the office in Thailand, but we just send our JICA staff to be posted in some countries just to make sure that our cooperation program that make it more closely and efficiently, that our JICA staff can have the chance to discuss with the agency concerned. And we want to promote this partnership with many countries, but it still depend on the policy of the partner, and also depend on the policy of the traditional donor countries that we think we should discuss further how to promote more and more. This is what JICA try to do on the partnership, and for during these periods that we get the impact from the COVID-19, but after post-COVID-19, we think that the partnership play more important role, because JICA can also continue our cooperation with the partner countries through this partnership cooperation program. That's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing for your insights and for sharing the experience of JICA. Mr. Tormarbilong, can I ask you to your intention?
Thank you, Rachel. I actually, as I mentioned in my presentation previously, that one of our mission is how to support the achievement of SDGs. And of course, currently we don't have any cooperation yet with the other traditional partner or the bilateral, but we are very open to do such cooperation. What I'd like to add is how we have experience, it's very quite new actually, how can build a model that when we have a problem, I mean, we have a challenge to establish a cooperation to a government, maybe we can turn around, find a local partner that again is feasible to support again the SDGs. This has been done by Indonesian aid, particularly when we do cooperation with a foundation in a particular country in how to assist the society that has a problem with the food and medical facilities. And we are going to continue this cooperation also in terms of education. So we asked the foundation actually to do selection for scholarship recipient will be sent to the Indonesia. And you're also preparing the cooperation for the next operation, that's how to empower we call it the human empowerment. So again, we are partnering with this foundation because again, based on our communication and understanding, it's much feasible to do the cooperation with this NGO, because we have a problem to establish the cooperation with the government. So that's so far we have been doing, especially to support the achievement of the SDGs. Over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights from Indonesian aid. Very much appreciated. Mr. Dasan, you told us earlier about the launch of Kazakh Aid, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, as a new agency, how are you planning to integrate partnerships into your future work to support the SDGs?
Well, thank you, Rachel. we are still on the stage when we are planning to plan, to develop our grand strategy. And we strongly rely on trilateral cooperation as an emerging agency, emerging donor. And with both traditional donors, triangular cooperation, and other new donors, South-South cooperation. We believe that this approach allows to yield most of the value from creating mutually beneficial relations with other development actors. And well, in terms of trilateral cooperation, I think that it's important to have some documents such as the MOU and sign MOUs, and I absolutely agree with that it is important for public relations purposes. But we also try in every case to conclude following documents such as joint plan of actions or roadmaps of cooperation, which should be integral part of MOUs. And by the way, such roadmaps or joint plan of actions we signed following the MOUs with the USAID and with COICA. They're very concrete, and it is very helpful for our activity. Well, I just wanted to return back to COVID-19 issue, and of course I absolutely agree that the world community should be join the effort in order to prevent such kind of pandemic. But how to do it? Well, Kazakhstan actually proposed to create international agency on biosecurity. Well, I think that I didn't participate in that work when Kazakhstan proposed such an idea. But I think it's more about how to create, how to build capacity to produce vaccines, necessary vaccines. And you know that actually vaccines were developed against coronavirus relatively quickly, but mass production was not that well as it should be. And by the way, Kazakhstan was among the first 6 countries which developed its own vaccine, Kazvak, and we sent it as humanitarian aid to our neighbors in Central Asia. Though again, I think that it's the whole story. It's better not to give vaccine, but to give capacity to such to create apps, provide with equipment and also specialists, materials, in order, for example, to make to create such potential. So as for Kazate, we didn't send such vaccines to, for example, Kyrgyzstan. It did another organization because according to our law, we cannot do it. To do such work. It's about legal restrictions, which you mentioned. Maybe it's what you meant. So, but how to create such agencies? It's another question, or global organization. For there is, for example, International Atomic Energy Agency, which help to other countries to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. It's well-known atoms for peace, President Eisenhower's idea or his aides. And but it was a different story. It was about non-proliferation in exchange of assistance. So, but how to unite the mankind and to enable every state with necessary such biolabs or so, because it's also it's about commercial know-how. It's about money, actually, the technology. So how to solve this question? So that's I think the problem which should be solved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. And actually, one of the things that you spoke about, this the ability to build capacity to produce vaccines, is something that we looked at in our paper. And one of the things we found was that a lot of the investment in vaccine manufacturing was actually coming from, it was in the form of South-South partnerships, which we thought was really interesting. But thank you very much for your comments. I think what I'm hearing today is that there are, there's obviously this imperative for cooperation, but we still have lots of barriers that remain. So I'd like to ask our panelists, I shared some findings that we had from a very small survey of development leaders that showed some of the barriers that were identified by DAC countries, primarily in terms of partnerships. I wanted to ask our panelists whether these challenges resonate with their knowledge and experiences, or if there are other barriers to inclusive partnerships that they've seen or experienced. So what are these barriers, and most importantly, how can they be overcome to expand partnerships? And I am going to ask you to limit your interventions to perhaps 2 minutes each this time, if at all possible. And I might try and start with our partners from the development agencies. I wonder if, I don't want to ask Mr. Dastan to speak again immediately, but perhaps our colleague from TICA might be willing to intervene first.
I think, as I mentioned in our presentation, actually, when we promote the partnership, global partnership or global cooperation, I think we have a lot of concern to thinking about. And what we thinking about is that how we can continue our support, how we can go together, how we team up our program, and how we can work hand in hand closely together. And I think for the case of the barrier, as I said before, so whenever we try to promote, whenever we try to continue the support, whenever we try to keep the momentum of our cooperation program, it may be make some burden for country to countries, because in some countries they have a lot of ODA flooding, probably for ODA flooding country, and many partners doing the same thing on the same area, on the same ground. So we have to concern about the overlapping of the effort and resource. For Thailand, we are not the major donor. We are not the big donor. We try to manage our budget effectively. So that's why we try to, whenever we going our cooperation program to many countries, where we try to set the mechanism, we try to talking about our partner, what we are doing there, what we are doing on the ground. So we try to make use of the effort, make use of the resource very effective and efficiently. So this is, we try to overcome this challenge, overcome the burden, overcome the workload. So this is quite a good example to do that, because if we thinking about the global partnership, and we should think about this concern, as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and definitely hear the point about the burden, I guess, of cooperation. Perhaps my colleague from Indonesian Aid, I know you spoke about this in your presentation. I was very glad to see that. I think some of your barriers that you identified overlap with the ones that we found as well. I wonder if you could speak to that a bit more.
Thank you, Rachel. Actually, in case of experience, we don't have yet. But what I see is even in our regulation currently, it's not easy for us to establish a cooperation with the other partner. But now we are going to revisit this regulation to give us some flexibility to cooperate with other partners. So, because we believe that many things can be done when we have a cooperation with other partners. As I mentioned in my presentation, it will be cost us less because you don't need to do from scratch because we already have our partner that maybe do some preparation. So just to follow up, I would just to maybe you can chip in and also can do the same mechanism in terms of monitoring and evaluation. So don't need to establish by yourself. So again, the barrier so far we have is the regulation. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you very much. And that regulation point is very well noted as well. Mr. Dastan, from your experience, what are the barriers to cooperation?
Well, I discussed this question with one of our experts in the field, in this area. So, and we made the conclusion that it is difficult to assert that there is a set of features that can be separately attributed to traditional and emerging donors, because neither of these two groups are purely homogeneous. This is especially accurate when it comes to the new donors. For example, some newcomers choose to follow the path of most traditional donors by becoming or aspiring to become members of OECD DAC and committing to the standards promoted by this organization and so on, while others choose to pursue their own models of development, and that includes how the projects are initiated, designed, implemented, evaluated, and reported, of course. As a result, the lack of diverse enough standards of cooperation produces the need for emerging and traditional donors to create ad hoc solutions for every project or case. Although highly flexible, this approach may not always be effective to the extent where all benefits of global cooperation are appropriated. Thus, some comparative advantages of donors may be overlooked, or priorities of beneficiaries might become neglected in the process of parties' negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really picked up on your point about the need to, the use of ad hoc solutions and the need perhaps, and the challenges, I guess, that creates. Thank you very much. My colleague from UNSCAP.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly throughout these sessions, dozens of barriers being elaborated, the reasons behind. From the regional and global perspective, I think there is one of the barriers so we could effectively address within the resources we have. Of course, there's always, the resources will be always not enough, which is the lack of coordination, communication, and information. Here, so I think both the countries and agencies and the donor community, they could improve the coordination processes and information sharing. Through, as I mentioned, this type of forums of engagement, and also involve, as I said, civil society groups, local governments, because most of the developing countries who need the development assistance, geographical proximity is enormous. you see it in Indonesia or Central Asian countries. So the role of local governments. So it's important for the donor community also to address their immediate needs, because increasingly under these current climate crises, the extreme weather events have become more frequent and destructive. So those areas, underdeveloped areas in developing countries suffer most, and the vulnerable groups suffer most. So how we redirect our resources of assistance, ODA, more effectively, more targeted. So really need to have, get those communities involved. So how we can create some network, getting their voices heard and information and communication be established. I think that the most important aspect. So when we design and strategize our programs and projects for the ODA program. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that. And I've noted down the need for a network for including a broader range of partners and actors. It's very important, thank you. Raga, can I turn to you?
Sure. First of all, I completely agree with your outline that the barriers, I jotted it down, different underlying vision, political appetite low, lack of capacity for engagement, and procedural or legal barriers. And which made me think that all of these barriers stem from the fact that we are humans and we demonstrate human behavior. When a crisis hits, we tend to fend for what is next. So you can identify this as different underlying visions or different underlying interests. Policies are driven by, or local policies are driven by interest, and that we can see that also in the climate discussion. Political appetite is low, or is the political appetite maybe domestically oriented? Political appetite in taking resources out of your crisis that you're just facing every day, and as a politician, and I'm maybe a little, because I have a political background, you have the issues right there. So that could be, you know, low or just otherwise engaged. And then there is the capacity. Like we mentioned this morning, there's just so much to go around, but that doesn't excuse it; it explains it. So I think the barriers, the first step is to identify them and then admit and discuss, because there will be another crisis. We're in the middle of several ones that we still have to resolve, and we need to speak openly about this. And I make it a reality that this is a project, a problem that needs to be solved. And again, and I can't say this often enough, we can't do it alone. So the urgency is there.
Thank you very much. Stefan, that's you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just identify four quick barriers for partnerships on very different levels. The first one, I think we have a strong need to define the role of development cooperation in a geostrategic context. What do I mean by this? I think we saw already this kind of geostrategic context during the times of the Cold War. In many ways, that was not always supportive for development cooperation. Then we had a time where geostrategic considerations were not any longer that strong, and now they are back, but not in a way which is comparable to the Cold War, I would say. Just to make it a bit more concrete, thinking about authoritarian regimes, autocratic regimes. I just saw a paper by the OECD that the the amount of ODA going to autocratic countries is increasing. Yeah? This has to do with increasing number of countries ruled in this way. My question is not, or my statement here is not this is good, this is bad, but what do we want to achieve in this regard? I think we also know that we can't afford just to focus on one topic, for example, inequality within one country, not looking at other topics. Yeah? I think we increasingly see this kind of contradiction that we rely on countries because of their role for climate change, but in other areas it's rather difficult. Yeah? Just to see that China stopped this climate change negotiations or interaction with other countries indicates already that those things are interrelated. So defining a role for geostrategic context. My second point, very briefly, what I would call interface management. I think in development cooperation, we used to have this kind of policy coherence for sustainable development discussion that other policy fields shouldn't contradict development cooperation efforts. Nothing wrong about it, but what I see against the background that we are increasingly dealing with those global challenges where a number of department ministries are involved, we need to find a new way for interface management. Yeah? Ministry of Health is of course important for the pandemic. We have security, we have all these other, so this kind of intergovernmental or interdepartmental collaboration is something what is important. My third point, we know that we have rather a context of incentives for non-cooperation. Is there anything what development cooperation can do specifically? And I think I mentioned it already this morning that, and I need to think it further, development cooperation could play maybe more a role as for development diplomacy. And development diplomacy needs to be defined in a way, but I think development cooperation is rather a soft area. It's not like trade or defense. So countries have an interest, but not like trade. Yeah, I want to have this deal. So why not to make it a bit, this area where we can test the water, where we can collaborate with other countries, even if in other areas it is much more difficult. And we have in this area, Gandalf, you mentioned already, civil society organizations. We have foundations. We know already that we want to have multi-stakeholder approaches. So it might be also a bit more diverse in this regard. And development diplomacy could be important for developmental purposes, but also to lead the way for other areas. My last point, aid effectiveness under pressure. I mentioned it already this morning that I think we do not have any longer this kind of, Busan high-level meeting. Hillary Clinton was here as the Secretary of State. A number of heads of state came here. Do we expect that this would any longer happen? Probably not. At the same time, we know that if we just forget aid and development effectiveness principles, something is wrong. Yeah? Just think about ownership. If countries, and countries not just government, do not own what they are doing, this might be also risky. Yeah? It's wasted money if we do not coordinate. I think you provided already a number of examples in this regard. Delegated cooperation, that was good to learn that US and Korea and vice versa, you delegated to each other, and we have also in the European Union something similar, Team Europe. So what I want to say is I think we still need those best practices, how to improve, how to make it better. We need to adjust it to this kind of new context. And in this regard, again, I think for Korea, there's a specific role, a niche to bring together, especially in an informal way, in the Busan Forum context, actors on a formal level, but also on an informal level to have this kind of debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Mr. Cosgrove, may I ask you to keep it brief? I want to, everyone's main takeaways.
Absolutely. What they said. Yeah.
Fantastic.
No, I will be brief. As a development diplomat, I appreciate your comment, and I like to think that my job is effective in coordinating at the capitals level. We are not homogeneous, as was mentioned earlier. There is no one size fits all. And so, I think having the higher level conversations does have an impact, but that usually takes place at only a bilateral, maybe a trilateral level. One of the things that happened over the past few years, it wasn't just COVID-19 that impacted the development landscape, it was also the rise of nationalism. We saw a few major donors actually shut down their aid agencies or heavily control what they were doing around the world. Aid is unpredictable because sometimes it is political, and so that will impact the level of cooperation and how we cooperate. It also means that in many cases, we're very short-sighted. We're looking at the short term. How are we planning? How are we going to address this issue? Well, I've got 3 years because that's the money that was given to me and that's the contractual terms. We're not looking at the space. We're not looking at the big picture. So that actually inhibits the coordination. And the last thing I wanted to mention is, what do the recipients want? How do they want us to coordinate? What do they want it to look like? Because ultimately, they're the end user, right? They're the beneficiary. They're the ones that are going to get the most out of this. So, what is their role in this conversation? Not just local governments, but local actors, local CSOs. I think absolutely they need to be at the front of this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Professor Kwok?
Okay, I want to emphasize the risk of information divide as a barrier. Rachel, how many minutes do we have? Oh. Yeah, every one of us know. Do they know, those sitting?
No.
Our audiences?
I mean, it's on their
Yeah,
program.
they have no idea that when we're going to finish. But we all know about this. That's the information divide. So please open, donors, whatever you have, whatever you produce. I mean, there's not much of a secret here in this business, right? So in a universally acceptable language, actually I'm talking about to Korea. We produce lots of documents here in Korea with regard to the international development. However, they're all in Korean language. What are you going to do with this? Please turn ourselves into more global. To be able to be a global player, I think we should more proactive in generating our efforts into the more globally acceptable language. Yes, Google works, but it works better in the Western languages, not in our languages so far. So in the meantime, I think we should work more harder in opening our information and disseminating so that everyone should know what's going on. Actually, the information is the first and the partner is the next. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your interventions. I'm just trying to bridge the information barrier here, 2 minutes and 10 seconds left. I wonder if I can ask all of our panelists, just in 2 sentences, what are your main takeaways from the conversations that we've been having throughout the session today or throughout the day as a whole? Perhaps I can start down this end with Mr. Dastan.
Well, first of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude for a lot of information, and it provokes our thoughts, and so I think that in 1 minute it's difficult to summarize. I just would like to again to congratulate you and all participants of this roundtable, and wish to all of you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A colleague from Indonesian Aid.
Again, thank you for this conference. It's new for us. And of course, the takeaways in regard to the cooperation. So let's make cooperation much deeper in the future, and we hope Indonesian will be part of this cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleague from TICA?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express our deep appreciation and sincere gratitude to MOFA and KOICA, co-hosted for this event. And I think this is a very wonderful platform we can learn and share our experience how to achieve the global partnership together based on the context of the speaker and practical experience on the development cooperation work and program. Actually, with this forum, I have a wonderful time talking with my colleague from the KOICA headquarters, how we can strengthen and deepen our cooperation for this region. And also, I hope that this forum will continue every year, and we can meet and create networking to enhance further cooperation in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Basanaja?
Yeah, thank you. So from a United Nations perspective, so what's happening is it is in the middle of completing the development system reform, making the country programs more effective and targeted through this new system of resident coordinators system, creating a development cooperation office across overseeing the different regions. As a whole, program and projects become much more effective now and much more targeted. And we are there to complement this development cooperation process with our enormous resources and analysis, and also, most importantly, with our ability to help better coordinate the development assistance through our integration and economic integration programs, and as well as building trust, being as a neutral party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Naga?
Yes, I'll be really quick. I think my takeaway is that the good news is that we all see the importance of cooperation. Bad news is we're not doing enough of it. So we need to demonstrate the benefits of the cooperation, and it's not enough just to fund. We need to do things right. We need to adapt the right policies, and of course, we need to then have the interaction and the exchange of views behind or through, not only between the like-mindedness. And again, I can tell you that the 60-year-old teenager, the development center is ready to facilitate any dialogue that we might want. And I echo the thanks to the organizers for a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Stefan?
Two sentences. The first one is use the brand of the Seoul ODA International Conference and Busan Forum to sharpen the new development paradigm. There's a lot of potential. Second sentence, good to see that Republic of Korea might be different in terms of resources for ODA and also beyond, pivotal donor. That's great to see. Congratulations for a great conference and great moderation, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cosgrove?
Same. Thank you very much. There clearly is a will amongst not just the panelists, but just the reaction from the audience and the stories and questions we've heard today. Working together, I'm sure we can find a way. It might not be one particular model going forward, so we have to be flexible. But as I said in my presentation this morning, we are better together. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Clark?
I was going to say just do it, but I don't want to copy a typical company here. But wherever you are, I know, especially those youngsters, you are having a difficult time over your future as a future international development specialist. However, when you have competency and have a strength to be engaged in a professional work, you should be prepared well. then you will have a bright future, I'm pretty sure. So thanks for joining us until the last moment, especially those future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope no one minds if I just give my two-second takeaway. I promise I'll be really, really quick. But just to agree with everybody on the panel, I mean, there seems to be a general agreement on the need for cooperation, yet we still have some work to do to make cooperation a reality and to overcome many of the barriers that still exist. I guess the question we need to think about now is how we can overcome these barriers in the years ahead. I don't think we have an answer to this question yet, but conversations like this one that bring together the dual and traditional providers are so important to help fuel these discussions, and I really hope there are more opportunities to have these conversations going forward. So with that, let me bring our session to an end. A big thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate having you here and you sharing your knowledge and experience with us. So thank you very much.
So that brings us to the end of the roundtable session of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. Dear presenter and eloquent speakers, now you may go back to your seats. Now you're free to go. So ladies and gentlemen, before we let them go, please give them a final round of big applause. Thank you. Yes, we could enjoy yet another very productive session thanks to our wonderful presenter and eloquent speakers. Thank you very much once again. And in particular, we would like to express our warmest appreciation to our exceptional moderator, Dr. Rachel Gaea, Senior Research Associate at the Center for Global Development, as well as all of our distinguished speakers and presenters who shared their extensive knowledge and experiences and wisdom all day long. So thank you so much. So 이상으로 저희가 먼저
So far, we concluded the session 4 and we are very close to end. Only one closing remark away. So please be seated until we finish the stage arrangement. And I'd like to express my gratitude to Senior Researcher Associate Rachel Gaea of the Center for Global Development and all the dear participants who have been with us from the beginning until the very end, and the speakers who shared many insights and knowledge with us from the beginning till the end. Thank you so much. We have very final session. Please be seated because we are about to draw the curtain down for this year's conference.
Not done yet, which is why you're still seated here. So please give us one more minute. Did you have a great time today? Please raise your hand if you learned something new. I don't see a lot of hands. Oh, I do. Okay, thank you so much. That means it was a great success. Congratulations. And yes, looks like we are ready to go and do our final act. Well, much to our regret, now it's time to wrap up all discussions and presentations of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. And to conclude our conference today, now I would like to introduce the Honorable Mr. Hong Seok-hwa, Vice President of Korea International Cooperation Agency, better known as KOICA. So please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm afraid some of you are a little bit tired of this important, interesting, but incredibly complicating issue. So I'd like to deliver my closing remarks as brief as possible. 여러분 안녕하십니까? 오늘 오전
Distinguished guests, I would like to thank you all for your valuable participation in our conference, both online and offline, from early morning until now. I hope it was a worthwhile time for all of you. The conference today reawakened us to the fact that impending global threats, including pandemic, climate change, and international disputes, are transnational challenges that are complex in nature and cannot be resolved through the efforts of existing donor countries alone. In addition, we reaffirmed the need for a new form of a partnership where a greater variety of development cooperation players participate in order to more effectively respond to global challenges. During the first session, a global pivotal state charting a new path for Korea's development cooperation in an era of global uncertainty, we heard a valuable insight from Director General for Development Cooperation Bureau Won Do-yeon of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Assistant Secretary General Hao-Ling Shu of the United Nations Development Program, and Senior Development Counselor Heath Cosgrove of the United States Agency for International Development. Through their remarks, we noted the need for integrated approach to achieve SDGs and to resolve various global challenges. In particular, Director General Won presented us with a vision of how Korean government can fulfill its role as a global pivotal state that promotes peace and prosperity in the global community amid transnational crises including pandemic and climate change based on Korea's experience and growth from a recipient to a donor country. In the second session, New Emerging Donors Changing Landscape, Head of Program for the Inter and Transnational Cooperation, Dr. Stephen Klinsbill of the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, and on behalf of Director at Interim Xia Grace Wang of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and Director for Development Center Arna Dotor of the OECD, shared their important views. They explained the need for more integrated global partnership to mitigate the socio-economic damages for developing countries caused by the pandemic and the role of South-South and triangular cooperation in strengthening this partnership. I believe that building a new form of partnership on development cooperation through active participation of emerging donors will allow us to more effectively address the current crisis and increase our chance of achieving the SDGs. In the third session, exchanging knowledge, embracing new experiences, we welcomed insightful views from Deputy Director General Watanabe Gasajeni of the Thailand International Cooperation Agency, President Director Doromabilang Lumbang of the Indonesian Agency for International Development, Vice President Rama Nordon of the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, and Chairman Dastan Yelekunov of the Kazakhstan Agency for International Development. Through extensive experience as a recipient of development cooperation and in-depth understanding of the local political landscape, they introduced us to best practices that illustrate the successful outcomes of new partnerships. The diverse experiences of these emerging donors reaffirm that a new system of cooperation and diversification of methods not only strengthen the capacity of all development cooperation partners, but also enable development cooperation that promotes shared prosperity. Lastly, in the roundtable session hosted by Senior Research Associate Rachel Galea of the Center for Global Development, the speakers joined in meaningful discussions on numerous topics for more inclusive and integrated new partnership. They emphasized the importance of bringing together the experiences and wisdom of mankind in order to overcome the global crisis together, going beyond the capacities of a few countries alone. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, all of us here face the difficult mission of overcoming the global crisis while achieving the SDGs, which are prerequisites for shared prosperity around the world. To this end, we must embrace a greater diversity of players in development cooperation and further expand the horizons of the global development partnership. We at COICA will continue to actively strive to build a new and more inclusive partnership to achieve the SDGs and realize global values. Once again, I express my deep gratitude to all the speakers today for sharing their insightful views and knowledge through presentations and discussions, and to all participants, both online and offline, for your attention and throughout the event. With that, allow me to declare the closing of the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. I look forward to meeting you again next year to share views on new topics. Thank you very much.
The Honorable Mr. Hong Seok-hwa, Vice President of Korea International Cooperation Agency, aka KOICA, gave us wonderful closing remarks. Thank you very much, Mr. Hong, once again. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our final round of applause, so please give him a big hand one more time. Thank you. So with that, we will officially conclude the 15th Seoul ODA International Conference. And on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and Korea International Cooperation Agency, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all of you who are gathered together here today, who made this conference even more worthwhile and meaningful. So thank you so much. Your gracious attendance is highly appreciated. And also, we would like to thank our online participants for staying with us until the very end of our programs today. So have a great evening if you're joining us here in Asia, and have a great day if you're joining us from the other side of the planet. This has been Hemi Kim. Have a good day. Bye.